This is the world in revolution, and we are now going to talk about the situation in Ukraine today, 12/5/2024, 1 p.m. here in Jerusalem and also there in Kyiv, 8 a.m. in Rio de Janeiro, Brasilia time, at the time I record this video. And we didn't have any big news from yesterday to today, a small Russian drone attack against Ukraine. Mainly focused here on Kyiv, but there was also something here in Kyiv. The front line hasn't changed much. And there is still a lot of speculation about what Trump's peace plan would actually be, right? Yeah. There are several versions running around. Reuters has listed 3 versions of this deal, but no one knows which one it ultimately is. What we know is that the Russian propagandists are desperate, okay? Conan McGregor, who is another propagandist like Tucker Carlson, said no, that Russia is going to invade Kyiv now that it already has, I don't know how many 1,000 soldiers ready to invade Kyiv, and I don't know who there. Smells desperation. That hence, let's talk about these and other matters in detail. These news was not finger on the scale. It was the whole Dino Sagati, Bordiev, and several other people. Thank you there to the people who suggested news there on our website at wrevolvim.com. And thank you to you who are watching our video. If you like our content, please leave your like and subscribe here in the channel, right? Well, there was an attack with 44 Chariot drones, and the vast majority were shot down, as is normal. Some hit. Salvo, nothing significant from yesterday to today. Here, the Ukrainians tried to hit the Kaspoktin Yar base, which is located in Astaran, Russia. That's been a couple of days, okay? The information we have now is that no, this Ukrainian attack was not successful. This base here, it is in this region here, Astaran. And this is where they launched that War-Chekin missile. Remember, it hit the Dnipro. And this is a Russian missile test site, right? So the Ukrainians tried to hit here. Oh, as they're not saying here, this is where Russia launched the ORESHNIK. That missile that hit there from Dnipro and Russian channels say that the anti-aircraft defenses shot down the Ukrainian drone, but the impact, right? The shockwave from the impact damaged some of the facility's gates, but as they're saying, it wasn't anything serious, was it? Since we have no other alternative to this information, we imagine that this is really the case. No, we didn't hit anything here. This time it failed, but look at one try. Who knows, next time they won't be able to bring it down, right? Well, on the front line continues a series of actions here. It is very important to emphasize that Ukrainian and Russian actions continue here on the front line. It's not that the thing is standing still. There were more than 1,500 Russians killed from yesterday to today. A very large amount indeed, and once again without any significant advance on the front line, right? Here are some images of Ukrainian soldiers operating there on the front line, right? The end result is that once again we have the front line without major changes. If you look here, it's more or less the same thing. The others dying in large numbers, but without achieving significant advances, right? An interesting news that we have is that a niece of Putin, who is also Deputy Minister of Defense, Anna Chizveleva, she inadvertently said in a televised meeting, they knew about 48,000 Russian soldiers missing in action, right? So remember those soldiers, Ukraine does the math, it is already 750,000 fully disabled soldiers in the Russians. Then enter into this account those who have died, even those who are injured, to the point of not being able to be recovered. Of course, he has minor injuries. In theory, the guy will stay in the hospital for a while and will return to the front line, but no. We're talking here about injuries that the guy won't be able to return to the front line. I don't know, he lost a leg, he lost an arm anyway. And besides, you have the missing in action, that is those who were lost, that no one knows where they are, right? And according to, she said that she confessed that number. 48,000 Russian soldiers are in this situation of missing in action. Of course, the real number must be much higher than that, but it was already a shock to the Russians, because if you listen to the Russian propagandists, they say no, that Russia is not losing anyone, that it is only Ukraine that is dying. Guys, nobody is dying in Russia. I don't know there what is obviously idiotic. Everyone knows that the army that attacks him has a much higher chance of dying, right? It is much harder for an army to attack than to defend. So it's natural that the number of deaths in those who attack is much higher than in those who defend, right? You add that to the Russian philosophy of attack, which is already kind of gives very little importance to life anyway. And probably this number here is small, but the Russians were shocked by this number. They thought it was too large. Not that there's all that Russian missing action, right? In other words, it's lost in action, right? It really is. That's interesting information, isn't it? She was saying. Precisely from the Russian army's efforts to collect DNA from families to be able to identify these dead people, right? But that in fact ends up being a little productive, right? The Pseudo War Institute also doesn't talk much here today. It talks about the issue of the re-education camps for Ukrainian children. It seems that the personal implication of Putin and other senior members of the Kremlin in the forced deportation of children is becoming increasingly evident here. So that's who we are. That's why Putin is wanted by the International Criminal Court. This is a terrible war crime, and it's something that has been happening throughout the temporarily occupied region of Ukraine, right? Although the region is temporarily occupied by the Russians, they can't get the children out of there, right? And that's what he's been doing. They've been taking the children there from DA, from the south, from Ukraine, taking them to Russia to do re-education and stuff, right? And yes, we have more information here about it's references that they are putting here of evidence, new evidence that Putin has personal involvement in this type of thing, right? He'll pay for it, you can be sure. Well, then something else draws your attention. I had already talked about this yesterday, right? Tucker Kustin went to Moscow to do an interview with Lavrov. They're making a huge case of this, that they're going to show the interview on the 6th, now tonight, which is a very shocking interview and stuff. And it wasn't just Tucker Carlson. No, Douglas McGregor, who is another Russian propagandist, is also certainly on the payroll of the Russians. He did me good with this one. Oh, Russia has gathered around 180,000 troops to make a decisive attack in the Kyiv region. They have new uniforms and have hot food and showers. Look what a thing. How wonderful. Everything is ready for the attack. So that usually indicates a force that is ready for war firmly, right? In other words, now these people are going to take Kyiv, and this war and stuff will end then. And look, that's what I've been telling you. It's kind of making Putin feel desperate, okay? Why is that? Trump was Putin's last hope. Putin thought he would be able with Trump to really cut aid to Ukraine and abandon Ukraine, and then he would be able to conclude his war. And he is now seeing that there's no longer that way out. I'm not saying Trump will be good for Ukraine. Trump will probably hurt Ukraine as well, but he will not abandon Ukraine altogether as Putin had hoped. And then this completely screws up Putin. He didn't expect it. He doesn't have a plan for it, does he? So he's putting all the propagandists here to say this nonsense here that doesn't even make sense, right? Ooh, David, no. Russia doesn't have 180,000 troops in an underground bunker bathing and ready to attack here. Sorry, right. This is really 11 tweets that don't even make sense again. That's what I'm telling you. Advertising is breaking. Russian propaganda, it is very well done. It has a whole process of steps and things and such, but it has reached a point where they are desperate. They are starting to advance things. They are starting to try to throw things that would still be in the embryonic stage, where you see if it sticks. Right? On the internet, they are wanting to catch these things that still don't know how to stick on the internet, and already doing the stage of propagation, right? Of putting the big influencers. I have already explained several times how Russian propaganda works on the internet. I think it's worth explaining again. They have 11 mountain robots, which keep generating a lot of random narratives, which are random. Is this what a robot is for? Just for that, okay? This idea that robot increases the reach of the tip, that's bullshit. At the end of the day, it doesn't make any difference. You stole it. But to create these narratives is worth it, because he creates this narrative and then they begin to observe these narratives. The ones that take, that give, that gain traction. Have you heard many of these narratives? No, because Ukraine has biological laboratories and I don't know what they're. Now it seems that one has emerged that COVID was actually created in Canada. It was sent to Ukraine in Ukraine, that it became evil, and then it was sent to Wuhan and the guy. But they create a lot of totally random narratives. There is a narrative that Ukraine is developing a virus that only kills Russians and does not kill other people, and that would be released by birds. That is Ukraine launching birds with viruses to kill the Russians, and I don't know a lot of narrative that has no logic at all. But then these accounts were stolen by the Russians. They keep monitoring some of these narratives and paste those from the biological laboratory. It stuck for some reason. People trusted it, believed it, and said, oh, how absurd. Ukraine has biological laboratories. Oh, what a thing, right? Every country in the world has a biological laboratory. Brazil has a biological laboratory. Israel has a biological laboratory. The United States has a biological laboratory. Russia has a lot of biological laboratories. But can't Ukraine? Ukraine is absurd to have biological laboratories, and I don't know what the anyway, but it's stuck for some reason. It's stuck, right? And then when the thing sticks, when the narrative sticks to the internet, then they catch the big publicists. Then Tucker Carlson comes in, then McGregor comes in. These people who are paid, right, by Russia, right? Then they amplify this thing. But then it's already proven that she has that narrative. She takes it, right? She has traction. On social media, what seems to be happening, because they need to do something immediately, so they have to skip step, so they have to pick up some narratives that aren't there yet. They don't know. It has still been proven that it is a good narrative, that it really has traction on the internet, and they are already playing it for influencers to amplify it because they simply have no other alternative, right? Here, oh, Tucker Carlson is talking a lot of bullshit there with that thing. And Ryan Macbeth is still remembering this issue of Americans in Ukraine, right? One of the things that Tucker Carlson is saying is that the attacks are operated by Americans who are in Ukraine, which is false. The attacks are missiles launched from RAMARS that the Ukrainians have known how to use for a long time. It is very easy to use, including RAMARS. And then there isn't. You don't have any of that, do you? The whole point is that it's propaganda. Taker Cole is saying there are Americans there. He wants to talk the same way Nana did in Vietnam, because in Vietnam he had that too. There was a time when the United States denied that it had American troops in Vietnam and then discovered that it did have American troops in Vietnam, right? It's here. He says here, oh, Rayman, that back is not in this tweet here. But he says at some point here, that is the problem is this kind of information. Can this be harmful to Americans? Why? Because you know that there are Americans fighting in Ukraine as volunteers, just as there are Brazilians fighting in Ukraine as volunteers. There are Americans also fighting in Ukraine as volunteers. It has nothing to do with the American government. It has nothing to do with anything. It's the American who came out of there, who went to Ukraine. And then what is happening in this story, both on the front line and eventually some American who travels to Moscow. Is it risky for the Russian government to use this line from Tucker Carlson to act against these people, to arrest these people and accuse them of being attack operators or something worth it, right? So, but again, Tucker Carlson, we know that it's absurd then, it's big nonsense. It's the desperation of these people, right? Now look at something else also curious here. Jackson Rincon, huh? Who's another fucking Russian propagandist? In fact, he is a propagandist for Russia, Iran, Hamas, Hezbollah, because the guy is shit and he's talking here now. Look at this tweet from him here. Oh, it's possession of children's prognosis. It's legal in Russia. How did he say that, right? Because this is a tweet against Putin, right? Is Putin paying the propagandists? And then, ooh, Jackson Rington is starting to complain, blackmail Putin stuff and such. I don't know, right? Because that's how it is. I don't even know if what he's saying here is true, but it's certainly propaganda against Putin. And this from here is Jackson Rington not receiving the money. The pics didn't fall, right? How people speak in Brazil. Here, oh. And there are other things here too. Oh, other Russian officials said in Moscow, this is a newspaper report, right? That's something everyone already knew, right? But as the newspaper is saying, 4 Russian officials in Moscow told the Times that that missile, the ORESHNIK, which was the missile launched against the Niccolo, was a pure marketing operation. We knew this. I said this here from the beginning. Everyone already knew this, right? And again, that's it. It's part of this desperate Putin marketing propaganda, right? Putin is really upset, and look what's happening here. China is fed up with Russia. Stop making threats. I have already told you that China does not want escalation of this war. China is one of the big factors that can stop this war. Just put your little finger there in Putin's respirator and Putin sinks, right? Russia has no alternative. Russia has become a country subservient to China, right? And China doesn't like it when things go too far to the side of nuclear weapons and stuff because it hurts trade. China needs trade. She gets her wealth from trade. So this situation here seems like even the Chinese are already kind of fed up of these threats from Putin because this is harming them, right? Well, you have Trump's parents' plans. As I told you, Putin's expectation was that Trump would win in the United States. So far it was, but then Trump was going to completely cut aid to Ukraine and he was going to try 11 shitty parent agreements. He was going to leave Ukraine there. What about the fact that Trump wants to solve the Ukraine problem even if it's with shitty parents' agreement. This is terrible for Putin because Putin cannot keep his troops, even in the current situation. Many people don't think so, because if we freeze the front line now, it will be a victory for Russia, because Russia has occupied a lot of areas of Ukraine. And the bullshit that in the end is not economic. It sucks for Putin because he can't keep this whole area occupied, right? And it is, or the cost of keeping this whole area occupied is too great. The only alternative for Putin was Trump. Abandoning Ukraine completely, leaving Ukraine is not my problem. You and the Russians and the Ukrainians see each other, and that's it. This is what Putin wanted, and this is not what he is having, however bad Trump's plans are. Not bad enough to help Putin, right? And here is this report that came out on CNN Brazil. I'm putting it here just to warn you. It's the report that was published by Reuters, and it's wrong, okay? It talks about territorial concessions to Russia. There will be no territorial concession to Russia simply because Ukraine cannot accept it. What can happen, what has already been negotiated, this is a possibility, is that there will be a ceasefire with the areas still occupied by the Russians. But this does not mean that these areas were ceded by the Russians. The idea is that this will be resolved later, right? Anyway, in other words, the CNN Brazil people here are following Reuters Russian propaganda, trying to say that, look, it's going to be very bad for Ukraine. Ukraine will lose the war. No, you won't, will you? Even if it is as bad as they are saying here, it is still even worse for Putin. Putin gets even more caught up in this situation, right? NATO is discussing scenarios to end the war in Ukraine, according to Bloomberg E. And it is planning to greatly increase military aid to Kyiv to improve its negotiating position. That's true. That's something worth it. Biden has already sent 725,000 in aid, including military, to Ukraine. NATO should send another fucking thing there too to help Ukraine. Then yes, this has a chance to end. This war is going to be very interesting, isn't it? Really, if Trump achieves his goal, because Trump said he was going to end all wars before taking office. If he succeeds, notice that there are movements in this direction, right? I don't know if he'll make it. I don't think so. Okay. I think the case of Ukraine and Russia is difficult to achieve, but it is anyway. What he is putting here, there is this possibility. Have you thought about whether you can achieve it? It was really a Trump thing, wasn't it? Well, Stolichenko, he puts here a very curious thing, a phenomenon that he has followed, which is now maps of Europe in which Ukraine appears along with Europe. And he's obviously very pleased with that, isn't he? Because according to him, for a long time, you saw several maps of Europe in which Ukraine did not appear, right? They simply took it here. Ukraine is from Europe, and Ukraine geographically is in Europe. There's no denying that it is in Europe, right? Anyway, good news from here, right? Well, the Russian envoy to the UN, right? Nebenzia is trying to justify the re-education camps for Ukrainian children with the following explanation. Look, in a Ukrainian village, right? That's where all the residents speak Russia. They speak Russian, they go to Russia and stuff. They put two banderets. Yes, it's because flag is the name of a Ukrainian hero and something that creates independence for Ukraine, right? In 5 years, all the children become banderets there in that business, and a lot, and start marching on the Nazi flag. And I don't know that that's what the residents of the village say, right? I mean, look at the description he's making, first thing. Ukrainian village where people speak Russian, you speak Russian. It doesn't mean you support Russia. I'm just saying you speak, right? In Brazil, Portuguese is spoken, which does not mean that there are people in Brazil who want to. The annexation of Brazil to Portugal, no one wants it. So anyway, in the United States, English is spoken. You don't want to be part of England, do you? Does Russia get this idea that if you speak Russian, you are part of Russia? No, it's not. The guy speaks Russian, but it has nothing to do with it, right? And what they show here is that if they have influence from abroad, everyone wants freedom. That's what I'm talking about. Everyone wants freedom. No one wants to be subjugated by dictatorial countries like Russia, like Lula here in Brazil, like other dictatorships in the world. No one wants that kind of thing. So evidently people start looking for freedom. What is he speaking here of re-education of children? It is ultimately the worst you can imagine even. It is that brainwashing to make the child believe that it is not. That is, that war is, that is, that it's this kind of indoctrination they do there for Ukrainian children. unfortunately, right? Another problem in Russia, people have been talking about various economic problems in Russia, right? The Russian economy is collapsing, right? But there are some things too, which is even divine intervention, because look at the case here, the harvest. Russia had a 40% drop in the winter harvest there in Russia. That is, they are having serious problems due to climate issues for random reasons that have nothing to do with the war. At the end of the day, Russian agriculture is in trouble, and this is a big problem for Putin, although this from here was not caused by the war. Or maybe I do, okay? I don't know, suddenly. Any influence there? Was there a shortage of people to cultivate the land? I don't know, do I? They sold all the fertilizer to Brazil and let it be fertilizer. Something like that, I don't know, right? The fact is that this from here will make Putin's situation much worse, right? This is the crop that should be harvested right now. You're embracing this crop now. This will be needed later with the economy, which is already bad in Russia, right? Zelensky signed a decree imposing sanctions against parts of the Georgian government, right? As we said, the government of Georgia in the last election, the Russians managed to defraud and take over the government of Georgia, and he is sanctioning these people as well. France did it, Europe did it, a lot of people doing it, right? Sweden has sent a lot of parts for Gripen fighters to Ukraine, but the transfer of the aircraft remains undefined. In other words, in addition to the F-16s, Ukraine could also receive Gripens, right? That would be a very good thing for the Ukrainians. You're missing the AA aerial part there, but you already have enough parts here for a lot of Gripens, right? Here, that's enough to equip 14 fighters. You could throw a party with that from here. Hopefully soon Gripen will be arriving in Ukraine. It always takes too long for this kind of thing. And finally, the Sociedade Militar magazine brings here a report about Ukrainian autonomous drones. I've already talked about this for some time. This is still under study, okay? But it is being worked on. It is that idea that today, which is the big problem with drones, is that you have human control. And if you manage to break this control, this radio wave, right? You bring down the drone. So Ukraine's idea is for you to have fully autonomous drones. You don't have to control the drone. The drone knows what to do. It's going to hit such a piece, hit such a tank. I don't know what there. That's hell for defense because the drone is small. The drone is cheap. You can build a lot of them. Even if you manage to knock down one or two, you're going to end up having one that's going to hit your tank or it's going to hit the goal it has. And at the end of the day, they become killer robots like the guys are putting here, right? We don't know when this will really start operating. But the fact that there are people working on it there is certainly thank you for watching the video until the end. If you like the content, don't forget to leave your like. This helps the channel grow and reach more people. Yeah? If you don't like it, leave the dislike and explain in the comments how we can improve. Also comment on suggestions for topics we can bring here. Comments insulting or defending dictatorships and war criminals will be summarily blocked. I appreciate your understanding. If you are not already subscribed to the channel, consider subscribing by clicking the subscribe button below and ticking the bell for all notices. If you want to help the channel, see on our website how you can do so.